There's a simple golden liquid mixture that costs exactly $3 to make, and it can permanently erase deep scratches, white gouges, and water rings from any piece of wood you own. Not a temporary colored wax crayon that melts away in the summer heat. Not a cheap chemical marker that merely paints over the damage until it inevitably fades. We are talking about the full structural restoration of the wood fiber itself. And master carpenters, shipwrights, and ancient woodworkers have been using this exact chemical mechanism to perfectly preserve timber for centuries. Within the next few minutes, you are going to learn exactly how to heal damaged wood from the inside out, using a method, the modern chemical coatings, industry desperately hopes you never discover. If you walk into a massive hardware store right now and look for wood repair, you will be directed to an aisle filled with proprietary chemical solvents, toxic varnishes, and expensive epoxy fillers. The industry will confidently tell you that a scratched dining room table or a deeply gouged hardwood floor is a tragic, irreversible loss. They will tell you the only real solution is to hire a professional to aggressively sand down the entire surface, strip away the original character of the wood, and reapply a thick $40 can of synthetic polyurethane. They have convinced the modern world that once the surface tension of wood is broken by a scratch, the material is ruined, and only an expensive, labor-intensive industrial process can save it. But that is a fabricated modern lie. The problem of repairing damaged timber is not a modern household issue, and it was not solved by chemical conglomerates in the 1960s. It is an ancient structural challenge, and ancient people solved it flawlessly long before the first synthetic polymer was ever engineered. To understand how you're going to permanently fix your damaged furniture for $3 today, we have to travel back to the dense, misty cedar forests of ancient Japan during the early Heian period. Japanese master joiners and carpenters were building massive, intricate wooden temples entirely without nails. These structures had to survive devastating typhoons, freezing winters, and heavy daily use. When a massive wooden beam or an intricate floorboard was inevitably gouged or scratched by falling tools or heavy armor, they did not rip the wood out and throw it away. Instead, they relied on a deep understanding of botanical chemistry. They mixed pure raw seed oils with mild, naturally fermented fruit acids. They rubbed this thin, amber liquid directly into the open wound of the wood. Within hours, the crushed fibers would physically swell, rise back to the surface, and harden into an impenetrable resin. The scratch didn't just disappear visually, it was physically healed. This brilliant biological engineering did not exist solely in the mountains of Japan. It traveled across the ancient world and became the absolute foundation of military armories. By the late 17th century, European gunsmiths and soldiers faced a constant, grueling problem. The heavy walnut and oak stocks of their muskets were constantly being battered, scratched, and deeply gouged during brutal military campaigns. A compromised wooden stock could absorb moisture, rot, and cause the weapon to shatter upon firing. The soldiers didn't have access to modern synthetic epoxies. Instead, they carried small leather pouches filled with a mixture of raw flaxseed oil and crude acetic acid, basic vinegar. When a musket stock was gouged by a bayonet or a rocky trench, they massaged this dark brown liquid into the raw wood. The deep scratch would seamlessly close up, lock out the moisture, and become the strongest part of the weapon. Jump forward to the late 19th century, deep in the rugged American frontier. Pioneer carpenters building isolated log cabins and rough-hewn furniture could not afford to replace damaged wood. When a heavy cast-iron stove was dragged across a pine floor, leaving a brutal white scar in the timber, the farmers turned to the exact same forgotten science. They mixed raw, polymerizing nut oils with heavy apple cider vinegar, using a piece of coarse wool to heat the liquid into the scratch through sheer friction. The wood drank the liquid, the white scratch vanished, and the floor was permanently sealed. These civilizations were entirely disconnected by massive oceans and centuries of history. Yet the Japanese temple builders, the European gunsmiths, and the American pioneer carpenters all independently discovered the exact same chemical mechanism. They all realized that a scratch in wood is rarely missing material. It is simply crushed cellular tissue, and if you introduce the right natural catalysts, the wood will repair itself. But that's only the beginning of the story. Because what those ancient craftsmen were doing intuitively, modern science would eventually validate under the microscope. And that is where the timeline becomes even more interesting. If these kinds of forgotten stories matter to you, subscribe and ring the bell, because this is how knowledge like this survives. The journey from a 17th century musket stock to your scratched modern coffee table requires us to look at a fascinating period of scientific discovery. In the mid-19th century, the British Royal Navy was obsessed with wood preservation. Their massive warships were constantly being battered by cannon shrapnel, heavy equipment, and the brutal, unforgiving saltwater environment. The naval engineers needed to understand exactly why certain traditional oil mixtures could completely heal a deep gouge in a wooden mast, while other expensive modern varnishes simply chipped away and allowed the wood to rot. They placed these traditional timber remedies under intense scrutiny and discovered the brilliant microscopic mechanics of capillary action and polymerization. To understand why the $3 Carpenter's trick works so flawlessly, you have to understand the cellular architecture of wood. When you look at a piece of wood under an electron microscope, it is not a solid block of material. It looks exactly like a dense bundle of microscopic drinking straws, held together by a natural biological glue called lignin. When you drop your keys on a wooden table, or your dog drags its claws across the floor, the resulting scratch usually looks like a stark white scar. But in 90% of cases, the wood fibers have not actually been removed. Those microscopic straws have simply been violently crushed and flattened. The white color you see is actually the broken refraction of light hitting those shattered, depressed fibers. So how do we fix it? We use the exact chemical mechanism the Royal Navy documented. The magic of this forgotten liquid relies on a two-part reaction. The first ingredient is a mild acetic acid, which is everyday household vinegar. When the vinegar touches the crushed, dry wood fibers, it acts as a chemical relaxant. It penetrates the broken cellular walls and forces the wood to aggressively absorb moisture. The crushed fibers physically swell and stand back up, expanding to fill the physical canyon of the scratch. But if you just used vinegar, the wood would eventually dry out and collapse again. This is where the second ingredient comes in. You introduce a natural polymerizing oil, such as raw linseed oil or pure walnut oil. Unlike regular cooking oils that stay wet and eventually go rancid, polymerizing oils possess a unique chemical property. When they are exposed to oxygen, they undergo an exothermic chemical reaction. The oil molecules cross-link and literally cure into a solid, natural plastic resin. As the vinegar raises the crushed wood fibers, the oil rides alongside it, penetrating deep into the cellular structure. Over the next 24 hours, that oil violently oxidizes and hardens. At the molecular level, the problem becomes the solution. The damaged porous scratch absorbs the oil deeper than the surrounding healthy wood, meaning the weakest point suddenly becomes incredibly dense. It is essentially a self-healing biological concrete. This exact scientific principle was utilized globally before the invention of plastics. In the 1920s, rural American museum curators relied heavily on this chemical combination to quietly restore priceless antique furniture that had been brutalized during transit. They didn't sand away the history of the piece. They used the swelling action of mild acids and the hardening action of raw oils to seamlessly lift the damage out of the wood. It was a known, documented, scientifically sound process. You introduce a chemical swelling agent, you lock it in place with an oxidizing resin, and you let physics do the rest. Nature provided a perfect, deeply penetrating restorative compound that cost absolute pennies to harvest and leaves zero toxic volatile organic compounds in the air of your home. It was the ultimate architectural shortcut. And then someone in a boardroom did the math. That's when the industry noticed. A $3 permanent repair cannot coexist with a $200 billion global furniture and chemical coatings industry. Think about that for a moment. In the decades following World War II, the timber and furniture industries underwent a massive, highly profitable transformation. Manufacturers realized that building solid, lifelong furniture out of natural wood was not a great business model for recurring revenue. They transitioned to cheap veneers, synthetic particle boards, and heavy, plasticized polyurethane finishes. At the exact same time, massive chemical conglomerates realized they could monopolize the home repair market. You couldn't patent raw flaxseed oil and a splash of vinegar. But you could absolutely patent a synthetic, petroleum-based chemical filler and a highly toxic aerosol spray. Today, the global wood coatings and furniture repair market is an absolute economic juggernaut. A massive percentage of that revenue relies heavily on consumers believing that wood is a fragile, static material that requires expensive professional intervention to fix. When your expensive dining room table gets a massive white scratch down the center, you are trapped in an incredibly lucrative economic funnel. If you call a professional furniture restorer, they will walk into your home, look at the scratch, and slowly shake their head. They will tell you the protective clear coat has been compromised. They will tell you that localized repairs are impossible, and they will quote you anywhere from $400 to $800 to haul the table away, aggressively sand off the top layer of wood, and respray the entire piece with a synthetic lacquer. If you decide to be resourceful and walk into a big box hardware store, you are met with an aisle of heavily marketed scratch repair products. You will see brightly colored wax sticks and chemical touch-up markers priced at $10 to $15 each. But if you read the chemical safety data sheets on these commercial products, you will uncover a quiet, brilliant scam. Those touch-up markers are nothing more than cheap alcohol mixed with synthetic dye. When you color in the scratch, the alcohol evaporates instantly, leaving a thin layer of brown dye sitting on top of the crushed, damaged fibers. The structural damage remains completely untouched. The first time you wipe that table with a household cleaner, the dye pulls right off. The wax sticks are even worse. They simply pack the open wound of the wood with a soft colored paraffin wax. During the heat of the summer, or if you set a hot cup of coffee near the repair, the wax melts, smears across the table, and attracts dark dirt into the scratch. They don't want you healing the cellular structure of your wood. They want you buying a $15 temporary colored marker every single year, or giving up completely and throwing the scratched table in a landfill to go buy a brand new one. This suppression happens through proprietary trade names, massive retail markups, and regulatory standards that push consumers away from raw natural oils under the guise of modern convenience. Before I go further, everything I've revealed barely scratches the surface of what has been hidden from you. I spent months collecting survival techniques, DIY methods, and suppressed knowledge that industries buried for decades. All of it is inside the complete Forbidden Camping Vault. It includes the forgotten water purification trick that requires zero filters, the banned 1940s engine cleaning hack, the old farmer's method for rust-proofing metal forever, and the Deepwoods insect repellent trick the chemical industry tried to erase. 50 survival guides in one vault, zero filler, every page designed for immediate action. The link is in the description right now. If you've watched this far, you already understand more about cellular wood biology than 99% of salespeople in the furniture industry. Subscribe and share this with someone who deserves to stop throwing money at a problem that ancient carpenters solved centuries ago. Because now it is time to take your home back. You need 2 incredibly cheap liquids that you can find in any grocery store or basic hardware aisle. First, you need a small bottle of pure apple cider vinegar, or basic white vinegar. Second, you need a natural polymerizing oil. The best and most historically accurate choices are raw linseed oil, pure walnut oil, or 100% tung oil. Do not use olive oil or vegetable oil, as those will never cure and will eventually turn rancid. You want an oil that hardens upon contact with the air. Step 1 is the preparation. Take a damp rag and wipe any loose dust or grit out of the scratch. You want the raw, damaged wood fibers completely exposed. Step 2 is the mixture. In a small glass jar or bowl, pour exactly 3 tablespoons of your polymerizing oil. Next, add exactly 1 tablespoon of your vinegar. You are aiming for a 3-to-1 ratio of oil to acid. Take a spoon and stir the liquid rapidly. The mixture will temporarily emulsify, turning into a slightly cloudy, golden brown liquid. Step 3 is the application. Take a clean cotton cloth, or even just your bare finger, and dip it heavily into the liquid. Press it directly into the white scratch on your wood. Do not be gentle. You want to rub the liquid into the grain with heavy, firm pressure. The friction from your finger will actually generate slight microscopic heat, which thins the oil and forces it deeper into the wood. Within the first 60 seconds, you're going to witness something that looks like absolute magic. The stark, white, ugly scar will instantly vanish. But it's not just getting wet. The vinegar is violently attacking the crushed cellulose, causing those microscopic straws to swell and stand upright. As they swell, they suck the heavy walnut or linseed oil deep into the core of the timber. Step 4 is the curing phase. Let the heavy puddle of oil and vinegar sit on the scratch for about 10 to 15 minutes so the wood can drink as much as it physically can. Then, take a clean, dry rag and firmly wipe away all the excess liquid from the surface of the wood. The scratch will now perfectly match the dark, rich color of the surrounding finish. Step 5 requires absolutely nothing but time. Over the next 24 hours, the oxygen in your room will interact with the raw oil trapped inside those wood fibers. The oil will cure, transforming from a liquid into a rock-hard natural resin. The swollen fibers will be permanently locked into their new, raised position. You can wash it, scrub it, or put a hot mug on it, and the scratch will never return. Total investment, about $3 for the raw materials, and roughly 5 minutes of your actual time. You have just permanently healed your furniture using the fundamental laws of botany. A restorer in rural Oregon recently tested this exact method on a heavily abused 1920s oak floor that was destined for the landfill. A previous owner had dragged a heavy refrigerator across the room, leaving a horrific, deep white trench through the center of the house. Contractors quoted him over $2,000 to sand and refinish the entire first floor. He dismissed them. He poured a heavy dose of walnut oil and apple cider vinegar directly into the trench and massaged it in with a wool pad. 30 minutes later, the gouge was entirely invisible. 24 hours later, the resin had cured so hard that a metal key could barely dent it. The floor was permanently saved for pennies. Roman shipwrights knew it. Japanese master joiners knew it. European gunsmiths knew it. Your great-grandparents knew it. A $200 billion industry depends on you never learning those names. They depend on your frustration, your fear of ruining expensive items, and your lack of historical awareness. But this knowledge never disappeared. It was simply priced out of your awareness. The physical laws of the universe do not change just because a corporation puts a proprietary label on a piece of colored wax. Chemistry doesn't care about brand strategy. Nature has never charged a licensing fee. You have the power to maintain your own property, preserve your own history, and refuse the endless cycle of synthetic replacements using the dirt-cheap materials the earth already provided. Every share cracks the wall they spent billions building. Every subscription keeps this channel digging deeper into the vaults they thought were sealed forever. The next vault opens soon, and what's inside might be the most quietly suppressed household trick of all.